Have you ever watched a young child try to spread some cream cheese on a bagel? The cheese is clumpy, the bagel might break. It's really kind of challenging for them, and you're probably thinking, how on earth do I start with this? Where do I start? Because it seems hard for them, but it shouldn't be so hard. In this video, I'm going to give you some tips and tricks to help you understand why a child might be saying I can't, and help you figure out how to help them do it on their own. And by the end of this video, you're going to be able to start using some strategies right away, because this video is one of a series that I've made just for parents like you. You could either just watch the short video and implement some ideas right away, or use all of the videos and the guidebook that's on kidsmoveandlearn.com and make some significant changes in your child's behavior. So for now, let's dive into why they're saying they can't and what you can do about that. Sometimes they'll say they can't because they get frustrated and their skill level is a little bit below where the request is. Because there's actually a progression of skills. There's really no right or wrong answer on where to start. But when you think about breaking a skill apart, it helps you decide where you should help first. So like in this diagram, you can see that spreading peanut butter, which may seem simpler than cream cheese because it's not as clumpy, especially if it's not as cold, is still tricky for children because it actually can take a lot of smaller skills. And if you look at this list, number 2 itself, the idea of holding a knife appropriately, can be broken down into so many more skills. When you have an expectation or you have a need where you want them to be able to do something, the first thing you have to do is thinking about how to break it up into these pieces. Because regardless, children need a lot of practice in order to be successful at it. So in another video, I talked about how a kid learns to use knives to spread peanut butter, and sometimes things like jam might be more appropriate for them to use first, because that way it's a progression of skills. And so when you think about holding the knife, dipping and spreading is a completely different skill. And so if you needed to do something even simpler than peanut butter or jam, try doing it with mayo or melted butter. That might be easier way to practice using a knife. So why it's important to take apart a skill and break it into small pieces is so you can focus and teach that particular piece. Because if you try to do too much at once, you're going to find both you and your child overwhelmed. Before I go into some more examples, think about that particular piece within your expectation and start to break it into smaller pieces, like as if it was a progression of skills. What are all the pieces that are needing to be done? Like I showed you in the knife example, holding a knife or dipping the knife into the peanut butter is kind of needed before you can spread the peanut butter. I thought my son can make a peanut butter sandwich all by himself. I've seen him do all the pieces. And then I noticed he needed help opening the jar. So that's another skill that I had to put in if I wanted him to be completely successful in making a peanut butter sandwich from start to finish. So take a minute and really look at your expectation and pick it apart and think about all of those steps along the way. It will help you to intercept where you want. And then when you know they know all these pieces, you can say, yes, you can. And in other videos, I will give you some more tips and tricks on how to help them if they still say they can't the moment that you stop helping them. So let's take another example, swimming. Okay, what are some of the skills needed in swimming? Maybe it's floating, maybe it's arms and legs and breathing. Well, if you take that apart, floating actually also requires a skill of being able to relax, to be able to trust, to feel calm. Arms and legs, well, there's like angle, precision, speed, coordination, and then breathing. Well, there's breathing in, there's breathing out, there's turning your head, there's blowing bubbles, there's lots of pieces to that as well. So when you're teaching swimming, there's a lot to teach. And so what happens is they do a progression of skills over time, starting with just blowing bubbles. Because some kids might not even put their head in the water first because they're scared. They're not feeling trusting of their environment for some reason, this new water. So usually you start with something simple, like putting your head in just to your nose to get bubble blowing. Then you can work towards harder skills. So for kids, skills are often not just connected to physical, but also their social emotional development. So like, again, thinking about cleanup, it's common that parents want their kids to do it. So some of the skills that are needed with it is, do they know how to sort toys? Are they able to reach containers? Can they delay gratification? Can they focus on completing a task? And that's another one for self regulation. Are they able to monitor and stay focused? Are they able to manage time in a way? So if you said in 2 minutes you need to finish cleaning, do they know how slow or fast that's going to be? There's a lot of skills involved in self regulation at that preschool age. And so that might be a skill set that you start to work on first, too. As I explained in the knife example, is there's also progression to skills. So even when you break a skill apart, sometimes there's things that need to be learned before other times. And that can be a little bit difficult to backtrack if they don't have that previous skill set. So for in this example, you could skip choosing an appropriate knife and just choose for them. And then maybe you could skip also the dipping part and do that part for them. So it might work for you to add those skills in later. But in some other examples like swimming, it's hard to do because the steps here are really difficult. If you skip something, it might make it harder to move forward. Like sometimes in this example, swimming, it can be harder to skip steps. I didn't put all the steps here, just some to show you sort of how it may look. So if you were to skip number 4, you probably can get them to do number 5. If you skip number 1 or 2, those swimmers might have trouble keeping their heads above the water. They'll get a different outcome than the swimmers who learned those techniques. So a swimming instructor often goes back and teaches 1 and 2 before they get into some of the harder skills. So you're probably asking, what does swimming skills have to do with getting your kids to follow directions? It is possible that there's some skills that need to be retaught or some skills that kind of got missed along the way. And so sometimes there's a sequence of skills that are needed for things like cleanup. So you have to think about your individual circumstances, and you can use the guidebook from our website, kidsmoveandlearn.com, or just jot down on a piece of paper to start thinking about what is your expectation and what part of the expectation is difficult for your child, and start to think about the progression of that. And then that way you can decide where to intercept and where to help. Because think of cleanup. If they have never learned how to delay gratification, they're never going to be able to clean up and switch from one activity to a different activity. Think about it this way. Have you ever watched 1 and 2-year-olds play? They just pick up a toy. They don't really put it back. They just put it down on the ground and then they move on to another toy. And over time, we teach them to stop and put that toy back on the shelf to get the next toy. We don't realize that we teach that skill to them. So if some children didn't get that taught to them at a young age, they may be 3 or 4 years old and still having that kind of trait. And so you have to go back and teach them specifically because they don't know how to stop and actually switch to the new activity. So in this video, we really looked at how to take a piece of your expectation and break it apart into manageable pieces by skills, and then target which part of that skill you might want to teach. And also keeping in mind that some skills are best taught in a progressive order. So it may be important to go back to previous skills instead of just teaching a level of skill that's a little bit harder. And so this is one video. I hope you walked away with some very helpful tips and tools. And please go ahead and share and like and subscribe if you find this useful. And to really make this meaningful for your individual circumstances, I really recommend going onto our website, following this plan of reflection on reviewing the skills that are needed to meet your expectations and breaking them apart. Reflect on what your child can and can't do, and then select a skill to start teaching. Don't forget, if you like this video or find any of it helpful, please share and subscribe to our YouTube channel so you will get notified as soon as new videos are available.